and welcome to tonight's episode of the Dead Astrologer Society. I'm Donna Woodwell, your host for the evening, and this is episode number 13, where we will be talking about Chinese astrology and the I Ching. I'm really looking forward to this fabulous show because I am a Chinese astrology virgin, and I have hopefully several guests tonight who are going to help explain the mysteries to me. As you know from tuning in before, here on the Dead Astrologer Society, we explore the mysteries of astrology across time and through different cultures, ways that humanity has looked up at the heavens in wonder. As astrologers, we see correlations between what's out there and what's happening inside, and vice versa. And tonight, we are going to explore that from the perspective of the ancient Chinese culture and how they created their own astrology. So tonight I'm here with Armand Diaz. Hey, say hi.
Hey, hi. Here I am.
We are waiting for one of our other guests, Thaddeus Fenner, to hopefully call in a little later. We're having some technical difficulties getting him on the line. So Armand and I are going to talk on our own, which is awesome because I love Armand. He's great. He writes fabulous things. And Armand and I are both, we both practice Western astrology. We have ties in other places. And so Armand tonight is going to be talking about the I Ching. So let's talk a little bit first about what Chinese astrology is. And then the second question, what is the I Ching? Since our audience is people who love the paranormal and not necessarily astrologers, we can start at the beginning.
Well, gee, if you want to talk about Chinese astrology, we might be in a little trouble. I know very little about it, and most of what I know about it is through the I Ching. And, well, actually, I shouldn't say that. I did read a book on Chinese astrology once. It was a big, thick book, and it was pretty complicated.
Thaddeus is our expert on that, but he's not here now. So we'll do that in the second half. Place us in the I Ching world.
Well, we should mention at the very beginning that the I Ching is a book, and it is a book that is used as an oracle to answer questions, to get guidance. People have a lot of different ideas about how to use it and so on, but it's a book as opposed to astrology or tarot. Tarot's a deck of cards. The I Ching is a book, and through various methods, most people toss coins and see the way they come up heads and tails and so on. They will look up the answer to their question in the book.
So it's a book of ancient proverbs.
Yeah. Well, but proverbs are a little bit, sometimes they're kind of like proverbs, and sometimes they're things that they're just sort of sentences, let's say something along the lines of, the wheel falls off the cart, the man and his wife roll their eyes. So sometimes you don't have all that much to go on in terms of a proverb. Not necessarily like, squeaky wheel gets the most oil.
Excellent. Now, we are also being joined by Thaddeus Fenner now. Hello, Thaddeus.
Hi. How are you?
We got our technical issues resolved. So, welcome. We just started talking about the I Ching, and Armand is telling us about how it's a book of ancient wisdom and parallels, but parables, and sometimes just images that give you pause and make you tilt your head and go, gee.
Yes.
So continue with what you were saying.
You will approach it with a question of some kind or another. I think some people use a sort of yes-no question. The book is kind of usually given a sort of should I go ahead with this or not type of thing. It's sort of as though you've already kind of come up with a plan of action and you're sort of looking for confirmation or something like that. It's sort of the way it's a little bit, the answers are sort of structured that way. And then you will get either something that seems to speak very directly to your situation in terms of images, like you may have had a car accident or something like that, which would be the wheel falling off the cart, or else something that describes an overall situation. And the basic idea of the I Ching is that there are these 64 different, they're called hexagrams. It's sort of 64 different chapters, if you will, each divided into 6 separate lines that are describing a whole bunch of archetypal situations that can occur. And so it's sort of placing you within that whole picture of things. It's sort of placing you within this situation. And so when you know where you are and what's going on, it sort of helps you to sort of guide yourself and sort of steer in accordance to it. It's a little bit of a, it's a little bit like a map. It's sort of saying, here's where you are in the whole cycle of things. Things are on the upswing. Things are kind of in a state of decay. Things are in a state of decay, but you can save the situation. Things like that.
Well, I've never heard it presented that way before. I admit I know a tiny bit about the I Ching because there's an app for that. But I also have a copy of the Gray Book. The Gray Book.
The Wilhelm Baines translation, yeah.
That one. I do have a copy of that, but I've never heard it described as a map before. That sounds like a really powerful way to think about it, as a almost shamanic tool to help you locate where you are on the cosmic journey.
Yeah. That's a really good way to put it. It's sort of a map that really deals with time as opposed to space. Although I'm not exactly sure that's entirely true, but yeah, it has to do. This is where you are. Things follow a pattern. Things have a cycle, and so if you know where you are, this is a good time to push ahead with things. This is a time to hold back and wait a little bit to go forward. This is a time when maybe you should be swimming against the current, because there's a time for that, and there's a time for going with the flow. So you've got 64 different situations and 6 variations on each. You've got, I think, 1,028 possible answers to your
Armand, we're having you come back because you were reminding me of the conversation that we had with Carlos Cedillo about the Mayan calendar. You're saying a lot of the same things that he said about the Mayan calendar. So I bet you guys are going to have a fruitful conversation. So remind me later. We got to talk about that.
Okay. Right, by all means, sure.
So, Thaddeus, now that you're here, we started in the beginning talking about what Chinese astrology it is, how it differs a little bit from Western astrology, and how that relates to the I Ching. We were talking about all those kinds of things tonight. And since our audience are not astrologers, many of them are smart people interested in the paranormal, can you talk about what Chinese astrology is?
I think Chinese astrology is basically simple and powerful. Just 2 words describe it. It is kind of like the Mayan calendar, kind of like what Armand was just talking about, where you have cycles and you have repeating cycles, and you're trying to determine is where do I fall within this cycle. For example, it's a sexagesimal cycle with the animals and with the elements. So you have basically 60 different animals, and that's within the 4-pillar system. But there are other kinds of astrology. They have a planetary astrology that's very old. They were like the Maya, like other ancient societies. They were observers. They looked for comets. They looked for signs and clues in the heavens. They mapped the heavens. And they have various different systems. The one that I'm working with now primarily is just the 4 pillars of destiny, or Batsi. And Batsi is I think it's just a powerful tool. It's good at looking at people for who they are and what they're all about. And I wish I knew more about it. We've just within the last, I don't know, maybe 10 years, it seems like the floodgates have been open, and there's a lot more coming out about it. We really don't know a whole lot about Chinese astrology in general. I'd say we know less about Chinese astrology than we do every other kind of astrology out there. It's very mysterious, and I think the practitioners have hidden a lot of the good stuff, so to speak. So we can get it. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Is that hidden from the West, or is that hidden in China?
Hidden from astrologers that compete within China, as well as hidden from the West in general. But authors like Dr. Lily Chung and Jerry King and a handful of others have over the recent years. I think you may be familiar with Ko Hashiguchi. He's a practitioner of 4 pillars, but there's also other systems like the purple star calculation or purple rose calculation, and but you can take something like the 4 pillars and just use 4 pillars alone. But I think it's great to just add to what you're already doing, you know, whether that be Vedic or Western astrology. It's kind of like another way of looking at it that doesn't have anything to do with planets, and that's probably why Armand, I'm assuming, has been using the I Ching or I Ching. Which one is it? I think it's I Ching.
I don't know.
For so many years.
I speak New York English. I don't know. I call it the I Ching, but who knows?
I Ching. But it's kind of nice to not look at planets all the time, you know, and actually get some perspective from something else that has nothing to do with Western astrology or tarot cards, or, you know, it's just a simple way that speaks volumes. But there's a lot of rules, and it's very complicated, and we can maybe get into some of that if we have time. But
so it's if I understand correctly, it's like working with repeating cycles in time. That each phase of the process, kind of like the I Ching, each phase of the process has a certain quality, and it's describing the movement of change in time that helps you identify where you are, again, just like what we were talking about with Armand, in the cosmic map.
Sure, and there are periods. There are actually 9 periods, and this is a major focus of feng shui and also certain aspects of Chinese astrology. Like, for example, right now we're in period 8, and that period started in 2004, and it's going to end in 2024. And where we have 20-year periods, and there's 9 of them, and over and over and over again. And those are correlated to Jupiter and Saturn cycles, which are roughly 20-year cycles. So right now we're in period. It's actually considered to be a prosperous year, or a prosperous period.
Well,
I know that that's not exactly true for a whole lot of people out there, but I think that the potential is there, and I think once we get out of this period, we're all going to look back and go, wow, why didn't I get into real estate? Why didn't I do this one little thing that something was telling me to do that I just didn't do? And so the opportunities are there. It's kind of like, look what happened after the Great Depression. I mean, we had prosperous times, you know. So
I think what you say about how, like, maybe they keep a lot of it secret. I've heard the same thing about Vedic astrology, that like the textbooks may be sort of deliberately written obscurely, or sort of even in a sort of like sometimes a little bit like an overly simplistic way that like that would not encourage people to try to learn from books and so on. Like that the actual knowledge had to sort of be hidden a little bit.
Right, and that's a very contrasting way to, like, Western astrologers tend to want to share everything they know, and there's a man named Bill Watson who wrote about the difference between Chinese astrology and Western astrology. He says Chinese astrology is scorpionic in nature, whereas Western astrology is Aquarian in nature.
Yeah,
those are the differences.
Maybe today, back in the day, I mean, there were competing astrologers who were not going to share their secrets when they were employed by the king. And I think Rob Hand's going to be doing a presentation at Kepler College in the not-too-far-distant future about how teams of astrologers elected times for assassinations. So we've had our own history in that area, too. It's just perhaps not the way astrology has been practiced since we adopted Uranus as our mascot.
Yeah, that's right. We had a Saturnian astrology, and now we've got a Uranian one. Yeah, good point.
Yeah, and I think the ideas of Uranus as we understand it today is in a sense, anathema to Chinese astrology. I think the Chinese are Saturnian in the earthly sense, and that they're very concerned with doing things right the first time, and they prefer to keep things simple, get the essentials out there, and give people the answers that they're looking for. And that really, does that have a whole lot to do with learning about angels and getting into other aspects of Western astrology that we've seen lately? Looking at the soul, looking at, transpersonal ideas. No, it's just, should I buy this house? Yes or no? Am I in the right time for that? And people.
But those are very.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, but those are very traditional astrologies, and they work very well for traditional societies. And if you have a very traditional question, I mean, it works definitely within that frame of reference. If you, I think Western astrology. Well, I mean, to the extent that we even have a single Western astrology, which we kind of don't.
Yeah, we have a kaleidoscope known as Western astrology.
Yeah, that's right. We have this big kaleidoscopic thing. We might say that, well, getting fired from your job is a bad thing to happen, but it might actually be a really great growth experience for you in some way. That's something that I think that, traditional astrology, it's like, well, it's good or it's bad. You should do it or you shouldn't. But, we have a little bit, in the West, we have sort of sometimes a different approach to it. And, it sort of matters what you're interested in and what your frame of reference is.
Absolutely.
And in China now, as David Rayleigh is over teaching astrology courses to thousands of Chinese astrology students, but they're learning Western astrology, and in that practice, as you say, is more accessible because it is in the mass market. So maybe just like here in the modern Western world, after they got exposed to astrology, people decided to go back and start translating ancient documents in Western astrology. Wouldn't it be interesting if Chinese students of Western astrology started going back and trying to recover as much Chinese astrology as they could?
I think that's happening, especially with Jerry King's books. He's into volume 4 right now. He started in 2010, and I think that as far as astrology books go, and I'm a collector of astrology books, like most other. I'm sure you have thousands of books between.
We all are addicts.
I'm right at around 600 now, but it was a difficult series to start with because there are a lot of rules, and I think that Western astrology can be looked at kind of like what is the Outback Steakhouse slogan, no rules, just right. It's the astrology of choices. It's the astrology of me and what I want to do and what I like. What can I do with my life? And I think that's where a lot of Chinese are right now. They want to have self-expression. They want to express their political views. They want to go visit the United States. They want to be involved in things, and so they need to loosen up a little bit. And I think Western astrology is good for that. I think it's good for exploration.
That's a really good point, and you can see where Western astrology would catch on. I find that sometimes with clients whose background is from India, that they would very typically, they're very familiar with astrology, but they don't go to the Indian astrologer. Sometimes they come to me, looking for like that Western, choice-oriented approach as opposed to what might be considered a little bit more fatalistic. And I bet the same thing does happen in China.
Yeah, maybe people are getting tired of being told what to do, and that they'll never have a kid, or they're never going to get married, and maybe those, in a sense, within that framework, within that context, those are true statements. But maybe there's a way to break out of that, and there a lot of Indian astrologers that I've read online. They seem to be very constrained within their view, and they don't want to get outside of it because what they're doing works, and it works well, right? I mean, everybody who's ever had a Vedic astrology reading has probably been blown away if they've had. Donna, I know you've had Vedic readings.
I do. I have history there.
But as far as the accuracy,
no, thank you. We are live. You can ask me another time.
Can you comment on that? On the accuracy of
well, of
the
course.
Eastern approach?
I mean, it all depends to me on the astrologer. I think any kind of astrology, any kind of divination really, can be a mind-blowing experience in the hands of an aroused mind. That there is something to be said for that moment of divination and connection where a view of the cosmos, a grand pattern, and a life coincide in a meaningful way that is astounding to both the person receiving the reading and the giving the reading. I'm always astounded by the things that come out of astrology. And I think the same can I've heard Mayan readings, they've been amazing. I've had Vedic readings, amazing. It just depends on the point of view of that magical moment between astrologer and person receiving the reading, client, for lack of a better term. We need a better word for that. Receiver sounds like a football term. So querent is what they would use in some things, the querent. But that just sounds so quaint. Querent.
But we are, I think, a lot of astrologers, and not every astrologer, but they're comparators of systems. They really want to dig in and study the rules and get into the details and see why and how things work the way they do within those frameworks. And some of that is Uranus, but I think it's also Mercury. And but what about the Saturn part of that? And it's getting to the skeleton of what we're dealing with, and that's what I understand the I Ching to be. I've been reading on it over the years. I am not a practitioner of it. I'm just outside viewer looking at it, reading a few things here and there over the years, and it's genuinely impressive. And it's not something that I deal with, but I like looking at the symbols and thinking about what they represent. Like, for example, your solid line on top, everything in the middle is empty, and then there's a solid line on the bottom. To me, that's sort of bizarre. And how does that how can that apply to me? If I just flip open a book and look and see the symbol, and I feel like it has something to do with what's going on today, I mean, it's got to be significant, even though I didn't cast the hexagram, so to speak.
Well, that's like, in Rome, they used to use the Aeneid as an oracle. And they would just sort of open to a page and read a line and say, oh, okay. This is something for me. So you're sort of doing the same thing. I mean, that's, and it's interesting because, what you're describing, the solid line on the top and the bottom and everything in the middle being empty would be the hexagram providing nourishment. And that one, they actually derive the meaning from it. They say, well, that looks like an open mouth. You sort of have like a top lip and a bottom lip, and sometimes they use like visual imagery. Sometimes they say, okay, well, we have all solid lines on the bottom, or two solid lines on the bottom, and then there's all empty up on top, and that's like the lines are rising, and this is like, this is a cyclical hexagram. They have like so many different ways that they get the images from, and then they break it down into the trigrams, the 3 lines at a time, and then they'll say, well, if you have fire over earth, that's like the sun rising over the earth. They work sometimes with the images, sometimes they work with the position of the lines and so on. They really derive it from a lot of different places. It's not a very consistent system that way.
How old do you think the system is, or the book itself?
Well, layers and layers and layers there. The early stuff goes back. I mean, the Chinese are always ready to say 5,000 years, but the early stuff goes back a long time into probably its origins. Probably go back, before writing, and the earliest written down parts of it go back about to the beginning of Chinese writing. The names of the trigrams themselves, like sort of the basic units, apparently don't have any. There's no relation to other words in Chinese. They seem to be just sort of like their own words, like proper names, let's say. So it goes back a long, long way, back into the shamanic, back into that magical, that really they go.
Prehistory.
It goes back like the same level of consciousness, let's say, as the early zodiac. Not the fire, earth, water thing. But we're talking about like just the images of like even like maybe not even the zodiac, maybe the constellations. But of course, there's layers and layers and layers of commentary and judgments that have been like added onto it. So it's much like what you were saying about Chinese astrology, or Western astrology for that matter. It's something that's old. It gets a lot circulated to it. There's a lot of layers there. Some very good commentaries that are considered to be, part of the thing go back only a couple of hundred years, and some go back. Confucius is considered to be one of the main contributors and sort of organizers of the commentaries at that level. So. It's old.
Well, let's talk about that and some other ideas about divination in Chinese thought and Western thought when we get back from our break. We'll be gone about 5 minutes. I hope you will stick around, listen to our musical selection for the evening. I am quite proud of it. And we will be back in 5 minutes to return to listen to Thaddeus and Armand continue our conversation on Chinese astrology in the I Ching. See you in a few. Welcome back to the second half of the Dead Astrologers Society. I am here with our very special guests, Armand Diaz and Thaddeus Fenner, who are talking with me tonight about Chinese astrology and the I Ching. Now, when we left, we were just starting to touch on the subjects of the idea of divination, looking for patterns and correlations between, again, the stuff in the heavens, or cycles of time, or even cards, or picking up a book and having the words of the book speak to you, and our own lives. Now, I didn't introduce this earlier, but Armand Diaz is a Dr. Armand Diaz, and he wrote his PhD dissertation was on psychic mediums. And so he has a special perspective on the psychic arts. So let's talk a little bit about the psychic arts and how they relate to the I Ching and astrology.
One thing that psychic mediums all told me when I was doing my research was everybody has this ability, everybody has this skill, which I always thought, well, that just makes me a bad psychic medium because I don't have anything like the type of skill that they did. But, what I think that the message that was out there was that, we all have the intuitive ability, and it's sort of like a continuum, and it's, how much do you open up to it? How much are you able to sort of like turn the faucet on a little bit and get a couple of drips out, or do you just really let it come flowing out strongly? And I don't know what your perspective is on this, guys, but I know a lot of astrologers are very anti-psychic. They're always like, it's sort of a science. It's out there. It's not, you're not really doing anything intuitive. Anybody could do it. A computer could do it for that matter. And I for one don't see it that way. I see it as something that it's the consciousness of the astrologer interacting with the system. What do you think, Donna?
Well, you're talking to a woman who has Neptune conjunct her moon.
Oh, there you go.
Conjunct the ascendant.
Oh, there you go.
And Jupiter.
So I'm guessing that's an intuitive kind of approach.
For the non-astrologers in the audience, I just outed myself.
Donna's a psych.
No, I really really like Eric France's description. When he teaches class on writing for a general audience, one of the metaphors that he uses are those pictures that they used to have in the 1980s in malls, where I don't know if you remember this, like a picture that looked like nothing. It was a bunch of weird patterns that were all kind of skewed together in wavy lines. And if you just looked at it, all you saw was this big blurry image. But if you kind of tilted your head and looked at it just the right way, as if you were looking through it, all of a sudden this three-dimensional image kind of popped out of the picture at you.
Yeah, I remember those.
Those things. He said that for him, looking at an astrology chart was a tool to help him get in touch with his intuition, just like those paintings are a tool to help you see the world in a slightly different way. And that when he really resonated with the chart, it was like the person, the soul, the psyche popped out as if it was a three-dimensional image, and a whole bunch of information starts pouring out. That's very close to my experience, too. And not just with astrology charts, but with the I Ching and with tarot readings and with any other, I mean, heck, with billboards that just happen to be on the side of the road. I don't discriminate with my methods. And you're right, I think there's a lot of astrologers who like the idea that if you learn the rules, then you can apply the rules. But for me, the best astrologers, the ones who are synthesizing all of that information, are using their intuition. Just like the most brilliant minds that we have in any field, they're not just following the rules, they are somehow synthesizing, and the whole is becoming greater than the sum of its parts. And I would broadly define that as a psychic, in quotes, phenomenon.
It's well said, yeah.
Astrology can be a mantic art. I remember reading one of Stephen Arroyo's books on this, and he goes into it, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 paragraphs talking about how people use the astrology chart to receive a psychic impression. I've also read plenty of articles denouncing this and saying that anybody that does this is not an astrologer. They're not following the rules. Don't trust them, etc. And I kind of fall somewhere in the middle. I really think that with some of the clients that I've worked with, the information just poured out. Because I think that they really were looking for answers, and they sort of allowed that exchange to occur. But with those individuals who are a little reserved, a little hesitant, they don't want you to be really digging into their life, but they do want a reading. I think you're going to have to rely on those rules, because maybe there's some things that we don't need to know, that we don't need to see, and that that other person is not ready to hear the information, and so we just kind of have to go to the backup system, so to speak, and just really get into the rules and just do what we can with it.
Well, that's a really terrific point, and I agree, and I think that's such a, because I said, there's the astrology or the system of divination, and then there's the consciousness of the astrologer. But yeah, there is that third leg of the chair, table, whatever the thing has. It's
Tripod.
The third leg of the stool, or the tripod, is the consciousness of the person who's asking the question. They're really, this is, all three of these things have to interact. And yeah, that's a really important point. I think, though, like, when you look at a chart, I mean, if you just, I do an awful lot of it, and like when you first look at it, it is a little bit like those squiggly line things. Here I am. I'm an astrologer. I have a lot of experience, and I look at that chart and I say, it takes a second, or it takes a minute, or it takes a little time to let it sort out. And how do you select the information? How do you select the information? And that process has to be intuitive. I'm a little bit logical about it too. I look at the elements and the modes and things like that. But I also feel that, like, you can't. It's very hard to get meaningful interpretations until you can see, like, these themes kind of emerge in the chart and so on, and that's an intuitive process. But then again, I use the I Ching, and I also, tarot cards and things like that too, and billboards, things like that as well.
Seriously, but I had one of my most profound psychic experiences with the radio. Here we are on the radio, and I suspected strongly that I was pregnant, and I was trying to decide if enough time had passed for me to pee on a stick. And I was out in my car driving home one day and was thinking about it, and I just flipped on the radio, and there was a trailer came on for that 70s show, and the little blurb was, Mommy, I think I got Donna pregnant. And I went, whoa, okay, it's time to pee on the stick. So,
Wow.
talk about a moment of divination in an unexpected place. But Thaddeus, what you said earlier about commentary from astrologers that, I think one of the reasons astrologers do steer away from the psychic label is because, astrologers don't necessarily have the best reputation, but neither do psychics. And it's kind of like beaten stepchildren fighting for territory.
Yeah. Boy, well
and
said.
In a sense that astrologers don't want to be linked to, we've all seen the television gory stories about so-called psychics who can't tell the difference between their imagination and reality. And that's a tough place to be, and I think people go back to the rules of astrology and cling to them because, there's some fear from being on the edge. And it's not like our culture as a whole has a support system for teaching people how to distinguish between what's a wishful thinking and what's a true intuitive flash. And astrology is a comfortable place to be. There are rules. You can follow them and you will get an answer. But
I think that's where the Chinese system excels, is because they have that groundwork, that framework, that place to stand on where they can look at the reality of a situation and go somewhere with it. And instead of just constantly wondering, where am I now today? And that's like what Armand was saying earlier, and what you were talking about is getting a good sense of now and what does it look like. And I think that's really hard to do in the world that we live in today, with so much confusion around and technology and things to do, and it's almost it's just hard to just center yourself down somewhere and really think about your life, and astrology is a tool to get you there. So I just prefer to look at a few different things, and just for me, Chinese astrology, the four pillar system, is a way that I can feel centered and I can trust it. And
before I did astrology readings, I practiced a form of Native American indigenous spirituality with a woman here in Texas, and I used to take her channeling clients when she would leave the country to go teach. So I learned doing direct channeled readings to start with, and I found it really overwhelming. There was so much information, I didn't know where to look. And filtering through it all was a complicated process that usually wound up with me having a headache and a client who always wanted to come back for more. So I pulled away from that, and astrology for me became an organizing tool. It became a useful way to have a system to know where to look for information more quickly, but also a filter between me and them. And it just helped. A centering tool is a good enough term, but something that kept me in my space and them in their space, kind of in between. I don't. That's very fuzzy description, but
no, it's a good one. I think that framework is such an important thing. one thing that I always think about, I mean, I have had psychic readings where, I mean, the level of information is absolutely incredible. And yet, it's amazing that information can come through, but it doesn't necessarily address, if I had a concern about career or something like that. I mean, it is fascinating that I could get my sister's in-laws' names and stuff like that. But, what astrology tends to do is, or it really does very well, is to give you a framework where you can say, okay, well, if it's career, this is what we're looking at, this is what we're seeing, this is the time frame. The I Ching is sort of similar in that it will usually dive in there and answer your question in your.
Although, if you ask the I Ching the same question too many times, you get a smart-ass answer, which is something along the lines of, stop asking questions and start living your life.
Yes, that's very true. The other thing is, too, and I think this is true of all, this is any type of divination, and the I Ching is, I think, a really great example of it. The question that we ask is often not the one that needs to be answered. And what astrology or any form of divination, I think, does that is the most valuable is to give a different perspective on things. And sometimes, you sort of have this question about, should I apply for this job or should I not? And, you're sort of stuck in this thing. And maybe the answer really needs to be something along the lines that you haven't considered yet. It's the sort of third alternative that's not the yes or no that you think it is. And I find that's really, I think that any form of divination, astrology or the I Ching or anything is very good for giving you that extra perspective, the one that you haven't thought of yet.
That's negotiating the question, backtracking a little bit into what you were referring to. Donna, you remember that Lee Lehman workshop we were at where negotiating the question, I mean, it could take, days between somebody on the computer and because the astrologer knows that it's not the right question, and we really need to start thinking about what the real root of the issue is, and then we'll ask that question when we get there.
Right? It's not. Should I apply for the promotion? You're miserable at your work. You want to do something completely different.
Yeah.
It's exactly that. Yeah.
So many questions, so little time in one radio show. We are just going to have to come back at a future date and start talking about these things later. But because the front end of our show was a little chaotic with technical issues, I wanted to give our guests some time at the back end of the show to talk about how we can find you. So, Thaddeus, do you want to start? How can our listeners find out more about your practice and Chinese astrology? Go for it.
Well, I do Western astrology and in the Four Pillars system, the Chinese Four Pillars of Destiny or Batsi. I've been into Western astrology since I was a teenager, and I just now started to get more proficient with it. I just recently passed my level 1 exam, but I've been reading a lot before the exam, and so I'm just getting my website together. It's signsinlife.com. Kind of like Signs of Life, but instead of up, it's in, signsinlife.com. You can find it on Twitter, Facebook, wherever you find it. But I'm just writing, doing research, doing little consultations here and there. I'm taking some free readings, but I'm not getting too in-depth with them. I'm just studying people. That basically, I consider myself to be very new at astrology, even though I'm surrounded by astrology books and I've read quite a bit. I'm nowhere near the level of you guys, so, but, yeah, I'm just...
And you are right up the street in Dallas.
Yeah,
so
Dallas,
if you're in the Texas area, you might as well look him up because it's fun. Okay, Armand, your turn. If you haven't noticed, Armand is from New York City. So we're not going to start the Texas-New York fight here.
No. You probably
there is no fight. I don't think there ever was a fight.
No, we're too far away from each other to fight.
I've seen the Peace Pecan commercials. I have.
That's right.
That was one 80s commercial.
It was.
But it was memorable, though. I remember that commercial.
I know, I date myself all the time in this show. Just sorry, Armand, go for it.
No problem. Actually, my New York brogue is undoubtedly in some nasally contrast to you guys with your southern stuff going on down there. Integral Astrology, integralastrology.net would be my website, and Integral Astrology is on Facebook. That's my Facebook page, and Integral Astro is my Twitter. And I do the astrology, and in terms of the I Ching, I always think it's something that people ought to sort of do for themselves. But I can teach in terms of I do teaching in terms of how to use it. I do classes, and I've also, if you're on the website, I've got a couple books. I've got Integral Astrology as a book, which is about the different types of astrology and how to approach it. And recently I co-edited and co-produced a book on transpersonal astrology, having to do with kind of the big picture of astrology beyond the ego, as we sometimes say. It's not the only type of astrology I'd want to practice. Sometimes we want to be in the ego realm, and I'm down with that. But there's this other side to things too, and that's a fascinating book. It's got 16 great authors in it, and so you can catch any of that stuff at integralastrology.net.
Awesome. Well, thank you both for coming on the air tonight. This has been awesome. You are welcome back anytime. I am Donna Woodwell of Four Moons Astrology here in Little Austin, Texas, that weird little city in the South.
Keep it weird.
In Texas. Yeah, that's what we do. That's what we do. So, if you would like to find out more about the Dead Astrologer Society, you can check us out on Facebook at Dead Astrologer Society or on Twitter at just plain old Dead Astrologers. My personal website is at www.fourmoonsastrology, and that's spelled out F-O-U-R, Moons Astrology. I look forward to seeing you next week when we're going to be talking about Hellenistic astrology, which is a fancy way of saying the astrology invented by the Greeks that is the precursor of what we practice today. So I hope you will tune in. Check us out then, and thank you both.
Thank you, Donna. It was great.
Have a great night.